This is DBrief, brought to you by the Australian Industry Group.
Welcome to an episode of the summer series of DBrief, the podcast that explains industry to policymakers and policy to industry. These 3 episodes are 3 different panel discussions that were held at the National Press Club in Canberra in November 2025, when we launched our report into 6 use cases of artificial intelligence. This panel is Panel 1, Getting Started, with Martin Ripple, Group CEO of ANCA, Keith Ritchie, Head of Communications and Government Affairs at Siemens Australia and New Zealand, and John Mahoney, Partner, Deloitte Access Economics, and facilitated by me, Louise McGrath.
So this panel, we thought we'd think about, given the low adoption rates amongst Australian industry, what are the keys to success in getting started? What gives companies that sort of confidence? And also to try to understand what are some of the barriers. So we have Martin Ripple, who's Chief Executive of ANCA, which is an Australian company with sites across the world in CNC machines, heavily adopted AI, and I'd like to talk a bit about that. Keith Ritchie, Head of Communications with Siemens. Keith, if you spend 5 seconds with him, you'll know that he is completely passionate about digitalisation of Australian industry and what that means for a whole range of reasons, but productivity, but also decarbonisation. And John Mahoney from Deloitte Access Economics has been working with Amazon on a report looking at the barriers or the limitations for SME adoption and what that maturity index looks like. So I'll get started with you, Martin. ANCA is an old family-owned company, very high-tech, but it's still, there's a legacy there to protect. What made you so ambitious in using AI?
So I guess we looked at it from a competitive point of view, needing to keep up with our mainly European competitors, and felt that if we would just stay on the ChatGPT kind of train, we would do what everybody does, which have no differentiator. History of the company is to lead in its sector. We are by market share the biggest in our field, and so we decided to really aggressively chase that competitive edge and be the innovation leader in that field. And early on, I think it was pretty much 6 months before ChatGPT came out, I felt there was quite a resistance internally, more on the younger side than the more experienced employees, which I found very surprising. A lot of resistance, it's not ready yet, we can't do this, we can't do that. And we then very quickly came up with a hackathon, which wasn't a hackathon, but it got the engineers excited. And you order a couple of pizzas and a bottle of Coke, and they all come in the room, and suddenly they pay attention. That was our first, idea, and I got 4 companies to come in to present what they could do with AI for the company, and they came with amazing ideas, I have to say. The second thing we've done more recently was we put up a website internally, which I call Tinder for agentic workflows. I assume most of you know how Tinder works. Swipe right and swipe left. The married people, they shouldn't know how Tinder works. In any case, people internally put up about 120 different agentic workflows. And I got them voting on it. So everybody in the company is voting on which is useful, which workflow is not so useful. And we are now in the process of selecting the top 5 and then implementing them. And our next, to stretch this out, and our next year's objective is I'd like to hire 3 virtual employees. And when I mean virtual, it takes it to a new level, which would be AI employees. One for the finance department, one for the marketing department, and one's for the engineering department, where I'd like to ultimately have the possibility to hire 1,000 people without asking HR.
Excellent. So, John, that's very different to perhaps the experiences that you've been talking to the SMEs. Talk a bit about your report you released today.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. Deloitte Access Economics and Amazon new research today about the barriers to AI adoption and what the benefits are from businesses overcoming it. What we found in the research, Louise, actually, was that the second biggest driver for AI adoption among small and medium businesses was to meet customer expectations. So for those businesses in really competitive industries, manufacturing, retail, customer service, we're seeing big AI adoption. But workily, number one catalyst for AI adoption was that businesses were approached by a supplier of AI services. Now, while that's the answer today, we would love to see that change over the next couple of years when it's business need, profitability, or a bigger dividend that's driving change inside businesses rather than just because someone's come to them with a solution.
Yeah, I mean, as Ines said in his remarks and in our report, it's clear strategy has to come first. We have to be solving business problems, not answering queries. And Keith, in terms of your suppliers and customers for Siemens in Australia, how are you seeing AI adoption across that supply chain?
I think there's pockets of excellence. And Ines mentioned the research that was being done in the 1950s. We were doing research in AI in the 1950s. And we've been using AI and helping customers with AI for more than 30 years in real terms. There's some local examples that are fantastic. So we don't want to solve, AI isn't the solution, actually. The solution is to understand the problem first and see what can be done to enhance the efficiencies or productivity of any problem. And digitalisation, in all its terms, probably need to be employed. So we're running a month-long activity on AI at the moment. We have a focus month internally ourselves. We started about 3 months ago just with education around AI. Now we're really rolling up our sleeves around it and transforming our own business, making us what we call fit for the future through AI. But what we've found is that digitalisation is also part of it, because many of the problems don't even need AI to solve. Some of them don't even need digitalisation. They're just, we follow processes that aren't as good as they could be. So we're fixing whatever we can in terms of efficiencies. Every single team is doing this as well. So we started ourselves with a strategy that says, how do we get individual capability up? So that's part of the AI strategy. The second one is, how do we get teams and systems and processes using AI and digitalisation to enhance what we do, because they're the ones who really know how things operate, whether it's a finance team or the marketing team or engineering groups. And then third part is looking at how do we help our customers. In Australia, the opportunity is bigger than it's ever been before for AI and digitalisation. We have a lever that if we pull, we'll transform the country, and we need to, because it's more accessible than ever before. We have software as a service. We have all sorts of things that make the tools that were once only for very large corporations now available for very small companies in all shapes and sizes. We're seeing some great outcomes already.
And Martin, you mentioned that your staff were quite resistant, and I think this is perhaps a common theme. Other than bringing in pizza, and how did you address their fears? And were there fears about job displacement? I've spoken to some engineers who feel like they're cheating when they use AI, they're losing skills. What were the fears and how did you address them?
Well, the fears were all of the above. The inertia, the fear of job loss. I also think that in Australia we are sometimes fairly conservative in adopting new technology. Frustrates me a great deal that not very ahead in some areas, but behind in other areas. So I think we adopted for one the language, but make it accessible in terms of language. But also I think it comes down to the leadership, determination. And so I shared the story that I think always of the number 1,000 when I think of AI. And how do I come to 1,000? So human power is about 200 watts. You know, if you're fit on a bike, if you generate 200 watts for 10 minutes, I'll be impressed. Nowadays, I think nobody drove here. I think Chris drove from Sydney down. I'd be surprised if anybody's in the room who has a car who doesn't have 200 kilowatts as peak power output. Right? So it's a factor of 1,000. I don't think when the first steam engines came in, the first combustion engines came in 150 years ago, anybody would have considered that we're all sitting here with cars that have that peak output. If you think of the microprocessor, you know, again, human calculus, abacus, whatever you used in the 1930s, it took probably a long time. Again, the first microprocessors factor of 1,000. In the meantime, we're probably in the billions and only trillions in terms of logic and mass. And so for me, AI is probably similar. You know, we're again looking at a factor of 1,000. We have no idea of what's going to be possible in the next 5, 10, 15 years with AI. But I think we can all sense that it's a watershed moment for us. It's going to impact how we interact with data, as it's just been said, how we interact with technology. So, you know, I guess continuously passing that message on and saying, it's not AI going to replace you, it's going to be the person working with AI who's going to replace you, I think was the key message. But I guess it's work in progress.
John, did you want to add?
I think one of the most powerful conclusions of the Australian Industry Group report released today is the importance of consulting staff on the way through and bringing people on the journey. The most successful case studies in the Australian Industry Group report today all demonstrated that that process was working soundly. And I know there's been, some question about regulation in this space. It's actually quite a business advantage for businesses to be able to lead in this area. The two misconceptions, I would say that not all concerns and misconceptions. Some concerns are absolutely founded, but the two big issues that come up with staff, obviously it's about replacing people. Important conversation. The latest Reserve Bank of Australia research based on Business Liaison suggested business leaders a mild view of job reductions thanks to AI is what business leaders were forecasting in that research. But I would emphasise that that's the direct impact of AI. But there's the broader economic impact that we have to consider as well. And what our research from today finds is that there's more profitability and more growth from businesses thanks to AI. So while any given technology could involve workplace change, the broader productivity which is unlocked across the economy will mean job growth for Australia as well. And I think just finally, Louise, the other concern that business leaders that staff have relates to the capability of businesses to implement AI safely. And that's not just a misconception, but that's a concern that absolutely needs to be addressed. And that's why Lee Hicken mentioned it earlier, the AI 6, safe implementation of AI is incredibly important. Other research from the Australian Computer Society has found that even IT leaders are worried that businesses don't have the right governance systems in place. So this AI journey, it is about technology adoption, it is about goal definition, it is about profitability and job growth, but getting the governance right is absolutely going to be very important.
Thanks, John. Just to Martin's point about change over time, when electricity, was invented and became popularised, it actually took around 50 years from electricity to move from the homes into factories. So presumably people got up in the morning, had breakfast under an electric light bulb and then went to work and didn't choose electricity. And I think perhaps that's where we're at today. I'm sure Siemens have been part of that whole journey. What do you think is that gap? Why does it take so long for this sort of technology to move into factories? And what can we do to help companies to bridge that gap?
Well, recently on stage, our global CEO, Roland Bush, made it very clear to our management team that he sees the AI transformation as the equivalent of the electricity transformation for our company. And that's pretty big, given that we started in 1847 and electrification has been a huge part of our business. We're now the largest industrial software company in the world as well, and the largest automation company. But that transformation is absolutely critical. I don't think it's going to take 50 years for this to take place. And I'll give you an example. In my team, so I head up marketing, communication, government affairs, and whatever else the company wants to throw at me. In my team, I have a marketing person, and we needed someone to host an event in New Zealand a couple of months ago, and we needed someone to host a stream of that event, which was around technology and digitalisation, our accelerator platform. That person was in Germany. I said, you're going to host that event, but you're going to do it with real knowledge, not just from a communications point of view. You're going to take on the knowledge that person in Germany would have had. So she's downloaded off her own bat software called Solid Edge, which is our entry-level industrial design software, free version online, accessible to everyone in the room here. She downloads it herself, and she decides to do a 7-minute tutorial on that software. From that, she redesigns a holder for her iPhone that allows you to connect the cable and charge it while you're actually holding it, because you can't buy this. She says, I want to solve a problem that I've got personally. She designs a 3D model of it. She goes to the Melbourne Library, gets her 3D printing license at the Melbourne Library, and she prints that out. Now, the next step I've said to her is, and she talks about that. Now, that's accessibility. In the past, that would have been an industrial designer doing that work. I've said to her, the next stage is use the generative design capability. So generative AI that's already built into the software, make that lighter, but structurally just as sound. So use half the raw materials. This is what AI can do. So that accessibility, and she'll do that. And then she can 3D print that instead. But that's the accessibility that we have now, and SMEs should be jumping at that opportunity. You just have to get in there and start. And companies that are doing it are really going gangbusters, like they're doubling their size. We have a local example in Melbourne, a company called Automation Innovation. I was on the phone to the owner this morning. So they said that we want to solve the problem, and the problem is the way that they clean the molds that make glass bottles. Currently, they use ceramic bead blasting or chemical cleansing. Now, this is a supply chain issue. You're making chemicals somewhere, you transport, you use, you dispose of. And in the process of using it, you damage the mold because it eats into the surface. He said, I can do this with lasers without damaging the mold. But the problem is there's no one to program the lasers to follow the path of the mold without damaging it. So we put some data scientists in there, created some algorithms jointly, AI, that maps that path in 3 seconds. Now he's cleaning those molds without damaging the mold. Now, what does that mean? If you look at this, you take the extent of what does this mean for sustainability, for instance? 1 gram of silica is saved per year, per bottle, because of this. That's 700,000 tonnes of silica when you've got 700 billion bottles produced globally a year. 700,000 tonnes of silica, just the conversion process of that silica into molten glass uses enough energy to generate 1 billion kilos of CO2. So he sold this unit now, the first unit, into the largest glass bottling facility in the world, in the US. That'll roll out globally. So the impact from an SME on global sustainability is unbelievable. So what can we do if we pull that lever of SMEs with this technology?
That is a great story. It shows the link, as you say, between the digitalisation and decarbonisation and broader supply chain issues. But it also required, as you said, data scientists. And so data, you can't really talk about AI without thinking about data. And it's clear in the case studies that, a lot of data cleaning has to happen, or data security, before we get started. Martin, what did you do within ANCA to sort of clean your data or to make sure it was ready for your AI investment?
I think the short version of it is it's not ready yet. We're still working on it. But I think you've got to differentiate between cleaning the data and structuring the data. So I found that a lot of internal people had the approach of, well, we've got to structure it properly for the AI, and that's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy and resources. It's got to be clean, but it doesn't have to be structured. And I always remember back at the days when the internet was very structured. I mean, some of you will remember Yahoo. There was news, and there was sport, and there was entertainment, and then there was shopping, and so on and so forth. I'm aging myself here by sharing this knowledge. Anyways, and I was always wondering, saying, how is this going to work when everybody can set up a website? And how does this fit into the categories and so on? And Google came along and structured the data in a completely new way by where people were clicking. Right? So Google created and organized data in a new way. And I think AI is for me the same, but it can look at unstructured data and store it properly and make it digestible, make it usable for us. So if you spend time structuring your data, that's a waste of time, but it's got to be clean. And so we are still cleaning it. We still find stuff in it, but the focus has to be on correct data, not structured.
Yeah, we found the same, Louise. Product data, the data quality is the third biggest barrier for businesses successfully using AI. For about 44% of small and medium-sized businesses, their data is, I don't mean to say it's a mess, but it's a mess between product information, operational information, finance, HR information. It's in different systems at the moment. And as Martin mentioned, it's not just the structuring of it, but if it's not clean, then obviously that just greatly affects the success of any AI initiative. So, in terms of our action plan, which we propose in the research report, improving data is right up there as one of the top take-ups for businesses if they want their AI strategies to be a success. And in that sense, that's actually not a new thing. That is, even if you go back 3 years ago, 5 years ago, just improving data maturity inside businesses was already an important journey that folks were on. So there's quite a bit of work to be done there, Louise.
And I mean, improving that data management will also help with cybersecurity and privacy obligations and all sorts of things. But is that something that leaders can outsource, or do leaders have to upskill themselves into understanding the role of data?
Leaders have a very important role to play, just because Lee Hicken mentioned it earlier, but it relates to the coordination across different parts of the business, that it's not just something that happens inside the IT department, precisely because of the breadth of data use which is happening across the business, sales, in HR, in finance, in operation, in sustainability. So because the data is living in so many different places, and it's more than just the technical quality of it, as you say, it's the processes, governance frameworks, being aware of and complying with privacy legislation as well. That just because of the breadth of the data question across the business, it requires leadership involvement. It's not just a technical solution that can be outsourced, I don't think.
And Keith, thinking about that, but Siemens was its ANCA across multiple jurisdictions. How are sort of global data rules supporting this data?
We for Siemens, for our internal AI tools, we actually have guardrails around them. So we have, dozens of different tools that we're able to use that have been guardrailed, because when we're using our internal data on things in a large language model, if you're just using an external AI tool, that data goes into that large language model. So you don't want to just give away everything that you've got into the worldwide AI internet, if you like. But getting access to the data is probably the other thing, not just having it clean, but making sure that the AI tools that you're using are accessing the quality and value of the data that you have in your business. That's also something to consider. So we're doing that as well. But there's things that people aren't even aware of. If you go on a Teams meeting today, there's tools. If you're with an external company, there are tools that can record that Teams meeting without your knowledge, so that it can be summarised. It doesn't even say that there's an extra person or an AI bot on there. So you have to be very careful about AI and the use of AI. But if you're not using it for your business for industrial AI purposes, then you're probably going to really miss the boat.
And Martin, how do you think this changes within supply chain relationships? this data flow? Do you talk to your suppliers about this? Are your customers asking you questions around your data use?
Yes, I guess our customers see quite some advantages with applying AI. So they're talking or they're expecting AI features in the machines. It starts with predictive maintenance, but it goes a lot further to tool design and tool quality control and all the rest of it. On the supply chain side, I mean, I have seen little. I've seen a little bit, but a little too slow of adoption, to be honest. We've got supply chain all across the world. Now, I pick one example, maybe it resonates with somebody in the room here, who start business on it. Corporate travel is probably the bugbear of most people here. It's disastrous service providers in the market, and none of them is doing anything for me. And so I turned up to the hotel last night without booking. Oh, there you go. And so they showed up and they gave this presentation about how they can book a flight, and I went, okay, so that's very modern, right? and then my question was, so I book a flight on an airline in business class. I can cancel the ticket anytime, get a refund anytime, and so on and so forth. Do you have any algorithm running in the background checking whether another airline is offering the same routing, same time, same destination for cheaper? And no, we don't do that. It's flying into Hanover, which is a big fair town, if you know, in Germany for industry. But it's incredibly expensive to fly in the day before the fair starts, right? There's 3 other airports around it. I come from there, so I know. Does your company offer flights into the other smaller towns for half the price? I know we don't do that either. So what are you doing? We're booking flights online. So that's great. Yeah. So if anybody's in the room wanting to start a business in corporate travel, please reach out to me. I'll be your first customer.
I can't tell you how much I've bored my colleagues with similar stories around corporate travel. It's not what we're here for today. John, I think, as we've heard, it takes a sort of the leadership model. What can we do to help SMEs have that sort of mindset to embark on AI?
Australia needs to have a step change in AI adoption amongst small and medium-sized businesses. Our research out today, it has a similar prognosis to what you see in the RBA research from National AI Centre, from the industry department here in Canberra, which is that maybe there's 5% or 10% of businesses who are leading and who are driving the change, like we see in the case studies in the Australian Industry Group report today. And there's another, solid 40% or so who are experimenting, but there's up to half of small and medium-sized businesses who are really at very basic level. That is, they've just experimented with some of the off-the-shelf tools. We've actually got a proposal in our research report today for a tax deduction premium for small businesses to make a start in AI adoption. And the reason for that is we do think, for all of the efforts in AI Week and from organisations, that there does need to be, a real short-term boost to how AI is used across the country. The dividend is potentially very big. Ines Willox mentioned it earlier. Australia has a major productivity challenge. We've done some modelling and we think the economy could be an extra $44 billion larger in time if AI adoption among small and medium-sized businesses was higher. But one of the biggest barriers for small and medium-sized businesses is we don't know where to start. We don't know where to start. And something that just, turns heads is likely to get people more interested. And we just think something in the federal government policy space, like a tax change, even if it's time limited, is a sort of measure that could at least get businesses more interested to get started, because between the AI 6, between the other encouragements that have come from industry associations, the information is there just to take that next step.
And Keith, what advice would you give to small companies considering embarking on this investment?
Well, I think about this a lot, and we were talking about this earlier. The issue with any economy at the moment is that if you've not embarked on a journey to stimulate the core of your economy, which is what you make, the key industrial things, then you've got to work out how do you pay for all the things that you want. So how do you pay for your infrastructure projects? How do you pay for those services that we want? When the core of the economy, the industrial core, is about 6% in Australia at the moment, I think. And for every dollar in that, it stimulates another $7 back into the economy. You go out to the retail, and this, I'm not teaching anyone anything here. This is basic economics you learn at high school. You go to retail, and for every dollar in retail, it stimulates 50 cents back into the economy. And you go to infrastructure, well, that's got to be paid for. It doesn't stimulate, it's an enabler. And we love infrastructure projects. But if you're not stimulating the economic core of the economy, which is our industrial base, plus our SMEs represent 90% of that, then we're missing a massive opportunity. And for once in a generation, we have access to the tools for these groups that we've never had access to before. I mean, I started talking about digital twins for Siemens when I joined 15 years ago around what NASA was doing with our software to land the Mars rover. And that's what it was. That was the accessibility. It was really large organizations were doing this well. BMW, NASA, and all those sorts of places. But now everybody can have a crack. My kids can have a crack at this. My team can have a crack at this. The tools are there. And we're not just talking about, I think there's a misconception. Most people use AI and they say, I can write my email faster for me. That's just a waste of time. Use your own brain for that stuff, right? Get your cognitive skills up. Don't lose them. But industrial AI, to design things that you couldn't do before, to solve problems that you couldn't do before, this is an incredible opportunity. I think the government needs to have a massive increased focus on that. And the productivity review, in my mind, should have been all about technology, digitalisation and AI, the whole thing, because that's what's going to stimulate productivity and innovation, which was a dirty word 10 years ago in an election, as you remember. Innovation is the core of this. And if you innovate, what happens? Not only do you make more money, but any innovation tends to result in things like less resources required, less waste, less weight. And what's the outcome of that? Less embodied emissions. And what are our goals about reducing emissions? So you've got to see that it all is interconnected. And I think SMEs could play an enormous role.
And so, Martin, what do you see as the next step for ANCA on the AI investment?
I guess for me, it's really get the leadership team behind what I call curiosity, ambition, and lead. Which are for me the words of the year, coming back to this from before. That's 2026 for me. Curiosity. I love the word of just wanting to learn something new, and obviously you've got to be curious to be here. So, I assume we're all curious. You've got to have an ambition. I think that's lacking a little bit on a national level. They have an ambition to, be ahead of the pack, so to speak. And then it comes down to individual leadership. I truly believe that ultimately makes the decision or makes or breaks the company, makes or breaks the society is the proper ethical leadership. And so I'm bringing the kind of call it the middle management team along. Some are fast adopters, some are slow adopters. We only have good employees, obviously, but and so that's next for us to really bring them along. Once they realize what AI can do for them at the individual level, they're usually pretty quickly up to speed.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that concluding remark, Martin. And could everyone please thank the panel?